Have you ever wondered why modern people wouldn't survive even a single full week in the Middle Ages? We've become too accustomed to sterile hospitals, warm central heating, and convenient supermarkets on every corner. Now vividly imagine a harsh world where a simple everyday scratch could send you to the grave. And yet our distant ancestors didn't just survive, they successfully built vast empires and civilizations. How did they manage this amid absolute unsanitary conditions and the constant threat of a painful death by starvation? They used methods that many today would confidently call insane, illegal, or simply repulsive. But this is where the most interesting part lies for the modern person, accustomed to trusting only antibiotics and pills. Modern, rigorous science is suddenly beginning to openly acknowledge that many of these wild practices actually worked. Ancient people had no idea what the fancy word microbiology meant, but they brilliantly understood the practical results of their actions. Today we'll take a detailed look at 10 forgotten survival methods that saved millions of lives, defying all modern logic. Imagine a difficult situation where you have extra food but absolutely no proper refrigerator. Summer is in full swing, valuable food spoils quickly, and you still need to somehow make it through until the cold winter. It sounds like a harsh sentence for any modern family suddenly left without their usual electricity for a few days. But medieval peasants easily found a solution that would make any modern health inspector faint on the spot. They simply took chunks of butter or meat and submerged them in the nearest dirty peat bog. It sounds absolutely insane when you think about it from the perspective of our modern urban hygiene. You take your most valuable, calorie-dense food and literally throw it into cold, stagnant water. But here lies the true genius of medieval survival, which science has only recently understood. Peat bogs are a unique natural environment with zero oxygen content and incredibly high acidity. In essence, illiterate peasants created the perfect vacuum-sealed packaging a full 1,000 years before the invention of harmful plastic. Modern researchers struggled for a long time to believe in the actual effectiveness of this strange, ancient method of food preservation. That is, until archaeologists began discovering massive chunks of 3,000-year-old butter en masse in Irish bogs. The most incredible part is that this ancient bog butter was technically still perfectly edible. Of course, the taste of such aged oil was quite distinctive and had a raw, earthy flavor. But when the alternative is a slow, starvation-induced death in the middle of a freezing winter, you stop being a strict food critic. People would dig out their reserves in the middle of February and get a powerful boost of pure fats and life-saving calories. In the modern world, nutritionists sell courses on proper nutrition, touting the benefits of fermented natural foods. 14th century peasants would have simply laughed in their faces, chewing on their piece of sour marsh delicacy. This method was strictly banned in many regions with the advent of the Industrial Revolution and new sanitary standards. Authorities deemed that burying food in mud was a barbaric practice unbecoming of a civilized modern society. As a result, people began to get sick en masse from spoiled meat, trying to store it in warm, unventilated city basements. What was considered a dirty peasant relic of the past was in fact the pinnacle of food safety in those harsh times. Sometimes progress takes a giant step backward simply because of a false sense of cultural superiority over our ancestors. The funny thing is that today, elite chefs in expensive restaurants are trying to replicate this ancient swamp trick. They artificially age meat in the ground, add peat smoke, and charge an exorbitant price for it. Your office job requires a college degree, yet you still can't afford a dish based on a poor peasant's recipe. This is a perfect illustration of how forgotten survival techniques suddenly become an exclusive luxury for wealthy city dwellers. History has a very strange sense of humor, especially when it comes to our eating habits in survival. Technically, The process of storing food required specific knowledge about which swamp to choose for the hiding place. Too much water and the food would float away, too dry, and bacteria would quickly do their dirty work. It was true medieval engineering, passed down from a stern father to an attentive son over many generations. To sum up this method, we can safely say that bogs were the true lifeboats of the past. They took in perishable surpluses in the fall and dutifully returned life-saving calories at the most critical moment of the harsh winter. Science has only recently been able to explain the chemistry behind a process that ordinary farmers use purely intuitively every year. So the next time your power goes out, remember this ingenious historical life hack. Just please don't try to bury your expensive steak in the nearest puddle behind the house. It doesn't work that way. Most modern people, upon seeing a spider in the house, reflexively grab a vacuum cleaner or a rolled-up newspaper. For us, cobwebs in the corners of a room are simply an annoying sign of poor cleaning and a lazy homeowner. But for an ancient Roman legionnaire or a medieval carpenter, this inconspicuous, sticky soak was literally a matter of life and death. When a person sustained a deep laceration in a field or forest, they didn't have a sterile first aid kit on hand, and so they turned to a remedy that would surely leave modern emergency doctors speechless. Soldiers and craftsmen methodically collected thick spider webs in the forest or abandoned barns and applied them directly to an open, bleeding wound. It sounds like the perfect recipe for instant blood poisoning and a long, agonizing death from a horrific infection. You literally take a dirty, sticky web with dead flies hanging in it and shove it into your fresh wound. But this is where the real scientific magic begins. Magic that ancient people understood solely through trial and painful error. Spider webs turned out to be one of the most perfect natural bandaging materials known in the entire history of human medicine. The ancient Greeks and Romans used this trick on the battlefield when they quickly ran out of regular cloth bandages. Why did this work so incredibly effectively amid the total lack of hygiene in the Middle Ages? Because spider silk has a unique biological composition that scientists were only able to decipher under powerful microscopes. First, it contains a huge amount of vitamin K, which is the main natural catalyst for human blood clotting. The spider web literally forced the wound to close instantly, functioning like a modern, expensive chemical hemostatic tourniquet from a pharmacy. Second, this natural silk causes absolutely no immune rejection in the human body upon direct contact. This means that the body accepts the spider web as its own tissue, allowing new cells to grow directly on top of it. But the most astonishing discovery awaited the microbiologists when they tested the web for harmful bacteria and fungi. It turned out that spiders coat their hunting webs with special natural antiseptics to protect their catch from rotting. This thin layer of chemicals is lethal to many types of bacteria that typically cause infection in open wounds. It turns out that a medieval warrior applied a sterile, self-dissolving bandage with a built-in broad-spectrum antibiotic to his wound. Today, pharmaceutical giants spend billions developing what an ordinary cross spider produces absolutely free in your garage. In the 19th century, this ingenious survival method was categorically banned by the official medical academic community of the time. Licensed doctors proudly declared that ancient superstitions hindered progress and switched to using reusable cloth bandages. Ironically, it was precisely these clean bandages, which doctors forgot to boil, that led to outbreaks of gangrene in hospitals. By abandoning the perfect natural antiseptic, enlightened Europe began losing patients to infections on a terrifying scale. Sometimes trying to appear too clever leads you to ignore obvious, proven solutions from the past. So the next time you reach for a broom to sweep cobwebs off your ceiling, remember that you are literally destroying an ancient factory producing high-tech, self-dissolving, antibacterial medical bandages. Of course, today we have convenient band-aids that treat minor cuts much more neatly and quickly. But if you ever find yourself in a remote forest without a first aid kit, the knowledge of your great-great-grandparents could save your life. Just try not to think about who exactly wove that life-saving bandage while you're applying it. When we plan a heating system for our country home today, we choose between gas, electricity, and modern heat pumps. If the heat were suddenly turned off in winter, most city dwellers would start to panic just a couple of hours after the radiators cooled down. Now let's travel back to the harsh northern Europe of the 13th century, where winter temperatures regularly dropped well below -20 degrees. There was always a catastrophic shortage of firewood because logging was often controlled by local feudal lords under threat of the death penalty. And so the peasants came up with an architectural solution that today would violate every existing health and building code in the world. They began building so-called longhouses, where people and cattle lived literally under the same roof. Sounds strange, doesn't it? You're sleeping and 2 meters away from you, a huge, hairy cow is snorting, chewing, and relieving itself. To a modern person, this idea seems like unthinkable filth and a guaranteed source of every possible intestinal infection and parasite. But from the perspective of pure physics and medieval survival engineering, it was an absolutely brilliant and free source of energy. Every adult cow emits a huge amount of heat, functioning as a biological battery with a continuous output of about 1,000 watts. Put 5 cows in a room, and you get a powerful heater that runs around the clock and requires no firewood. This method was incredibly effective for the survival of entire families amid the most severe fuel shortages in snow-covered regions. Peasants built houses with a slight slope so that all liquid animal waste would naturally flow outside through special gutters. The partition between the animal pen and the living area was woven or made of planks, allowing warm air to flow freely toward the sleeping people. In this way, the animals warmed the people with their massive bodies, and their breath constantly raised the overall temperature inside the cramped space. Modern engineers call this smart thermal design of living spaces using renewable biological energy sources. But there is another surprising fact here, one that biologists were only able to explain with the development of modern immunology. Constant proximity to animals from early childhood trained the immune systems of medieval people to an incredible level of resilience. Children who grew up in such homes gained powerful protection against the many allergies and autoimmune diseases from which we suffer. Summing up this method, we can confidently say that our ancestors were genius engineers when it came to survival. They used available biomass with maximum efficiency, creating ideal closed ecosystems on the scale of a single, small peasant hut. Today, we ban such practices for the sake of sanitation, but in the midst of a global crisis, this very approach could save lives. It may sound wild, but if you ever find yourself in a barn with animals in the winter, just lie down closer to them. Perhaps it is this strange coexistence that will give you a chance to see the dawn of the next frosty day. We have all firmly internalized the rule that doctors have been repeating to us since early childhood. We need to sleep 8 hours straight. If we wake up in the middle of the night and can't fall back asleep, we start to panic, take sleeping pills, and complain about terrible insomnia. Modern people consider uninterrupted 8-hour sleep to be the main indicator of excellent health and a proper, productive lifestyle. But here lies a huge historical catch. Our ancestors never slept this way before the Industrial Revolution. They practiced a method known as biphasic sleep, which modern medicine long considered a dangerous disruption of the sleep cycle. What exactly did a typical night look like for an ordinary European in the harsh 14th or 15th century? People went to bed immediately after sunset because beeswax candles were incredibly expensive for ordinary mortals. They slept for about 4 hours, then woke up en masse around midnight for a couple of hours of active activity. It sounds like the worst nightmare for any modern office worker who has to get up early for work the next day. But for them, it was the most productive, peaceful, and safe time of the entire long and arduous day. This period of wakefulness was called the night watch, and it played a critical role in the physical and psychological survival of entire communities. So what did people do in the middle of the night when it was pitch black outside and wild animals roamed? They stoked the dying fire so the house wouldn't freeze to the ground by the early, cold morning. They repaired broken tools, prayed quietly, talked with family members, or simply reflected in complete silence. This proves once again that human biology does not change as quickly as we would like in the age of high technology. Our bodies still live in that harsh world where waking up at night was a necessity for the survival of the species. Of course, returning to such a routine in modern conditions would require a complete overhaul of our entire familiar society. Your employer is unlikely to appreciate it if you show up to work tired, explaining it away as late-night musings by the gas stove. Historical records are full of references to people who use this nighttime to create the greatest works of art. Writers, alchemists, and philosophers found in this nocturnal silence the very clarity of mind that is inaccessible during the day. The brain, freed from daytime sensory overload, is capable of generating completely unconventional solutions to life's most complex problems. The result is a fascinating picture of how ancient people perfectly adapted to the harsh conditions of their environment. They didn't fight their biology. Instead, they used it to enhance their own safety and psychological stability in a dangerous world. Biphasic sleep was a powerful survival tool that provided people with warmth, safety, and a clear mind without the need for antidepressants. So the next time you wake up in the dead of night, don't frantically reach for your smartphone screen or pills. Just enjoy this moment of ancient silence, knowing that this is exactly how your distant ancestors preserved their sanity and their lives. If a modern nutritionist saw that you drink alcohol every day instead of plain water, they would immediately sound the alarm. In our world, tap water is safe, clear, and available in any quantity practically for free around the clock. But now imagine a medieval city where a sewage system simply does not exist in its normal, modern sense. Human waste, rotting blood from slaughterhouses, and toxic dyes were dumped directly into the very rivers from which drinking water was drawn. Drinking a glass of fresh, untreated water in 14th century London was like playing a deadly game of Russian roulette. That is precisely why people found a brilliant, though controversial by modern standards, way out of this deadly sanitary trap. Everyone, from rugged bricklayers to small children, drank what was known as light or table beer every day. Sounds like the beginning of mass alcoholism on a continental scale, doesn't it? Imagine first graders walking to school with a flask of ale. But this beer was radically different from the strong drinks sold in our bars on Friday nights today. It contained only 1 to 2% alcohol, making it completely safe for regular daily consumption. No one got drunk on this light beverage. It was used exclusively for basic survival and to maintain proper hydration. So why did it work so flawlessly in conditions of total unsanitary conditions and constant outbreaks of dysentery and cholera? To brew even the cheapest and weakest beer, the water had to be heated to high temperatures for a long time. This simple process guaranteed the elimination of all deadly bacteria lurking in murky city water, saving millions of lives. Ancient brewers didn't know they were engaging in mass sterilization. They were simply making a tasty drink using their grandfather's old recipes. You would have died in agony from dysentery, while your beer-drinking neighbors would have continued to sow wheat in peace. This is a great example of how a modern, healthy lifestyle is sometimes completely inapplicable to harsh historical realities. Survival requires adaptation, even if that adaptation means getting slightly tipsy every day before breakfast. To sum up this method, we must acknowledge that weak beer was a true safeguard for Europe. It saved more lives than all the doctors of the time, with their leeches and strange herbal concoctions combined. People drank alcohol not because they were living the high life, but because it was their only chance to avoid dying of dehydration and disease. So the next time you open a bottle of beer, remember that you're holding an ancient elixir of survival in your hands. Just don't try to explain that to your boss when you show up to the morning meeting with a mug of dark ale. When we suffer a serious injury today, the first thing we do is open a sterile first aid kit with snow-white gauze bandages and cotton wool. We trust cotton because it looks clean, soft, and is produced in modern factories under strict medical supervision. But in the Middle Ages, clean cotton simply didn't exist in the northern regions, and ordinary linen was dirty and expensive. If you tried to bandage a deep wound with an old rag, you were essentially signing your own death warrant due to inevitable blood poisoning. And so the harsh northern peoples turned to what grew in abundance right beneath their feet in the cold marshes. They began using sphagnum moss as the primary dressing material for severe combat and domestic injuries. It sounds absolutely wild to anyone accustomed to the sterile conditions of modern surgical operating rooms. You literally tear a clump of wet vegetation out of a dirty swamp and press it directly against your exposed, bleeding flesh. It seems that after such an experiment, your leg or arm is guaranteed to fall off from gangrene after a couple of agonizing days. But in practice, this dirty marshweed turned out to be one of the most perfect, absorbent materials on our planet. In terms of its properties, it far surpasses even that much-praised medical cotton we're used to using today. They organized a massive harvest of sphagnum moss in Scotland and began making millions of bandages from it for severely wounded soldiers. To the great surprise of licensed doctors, wounds under the moss bandages healed twice as fast and almost never became infected. This archaic peasant method proved more effective than all the advanced medical technologies of the early 20th century. This story perfectly illustrates the arrogance of modern science toward the knowledge of our distant and supposedly illiterate ancestors. For many years, doctors ridiculed the use of moss, calling it ignorant quackery unworthy of an enlightened person. And only when faced with the desperate situation of a global catastrophe were they forced to acknowledge the genius of this ancient natural solution. Sometimes progress lies not in the invention of complex chemical polymers, but in a proper understanding of how the wild works. Our ancestors did not have microscopes, but they knew how to read the book of nature better than any modern biology professor. Summing up this forbidden and forgotten method of treating wounds, we see a perfect example of survival through adaptation. Ancient people didn't wait for someone to invent perfect, life-saving sterile bandages in a clean factory for them. They took the moss growing under their feet and turned it into a perfect medical tool for saving lives. Sphagnum was a silent witness to and participant in countless historical events, saving those whom complex antibiotics save today. So, if you're walking through the woods and see some moss, show it a little respect. Perhaps your ancestors survived only thanks to it. When modern people feel hungry, they simply open the fridge or order hot food through a convenient app on their phone. For us, hunger is a mild discomfort that's easily resolved in 15 minutes with a couple of taps on a bright screen. But in the Middle Ages, real hunger was a constant, invisible companion that arrived every spring when the old grain reserves ran out. If the harvest was destroyed by drought or frost, entire villages faced a terrible choice: die of starvation or eat the inedible. And so the hardy Scandinavian peoples turned to the most radical means of survival, which today seems like madness. They ate trees. It sounds like a cruel joke or a metaphor for the extreme desperation of people driven mad by days of hunger and cold. Imagine stepping into a frosty forest, chopping down an old pine tree, and trying to chew through its hard, dry trunk. But the peasants of the past were far from fools. They didn't gnaw on wood like beavers in the hope of getting life-saving calories. They invented a highly sophisticated method for making so-called cow bread, which saved entire nations from total extinction. This method was so effective that it was used in some cold regions of Europe right up until the early 20th century. It is a perfect example of how human ingenuity transforms a useless piece of wood into a full-fledged source of energy for the body. Surprisingly, it was this very tree-based substitute that saved Scandinavian peasants from scurvy during the long, dark winters without fresh vegetables. Bark is rich in vitamin C, a deficiency of which caused teeth to fall out and wounds to reopen even after they had fully healed. Compare this grueling struggle for survival with our modern obsession with various trendy weight loss diets. Today, fitness trainers force their wealthy clients to eat bran and fiber to reduce their calorie intake and cleanse their intestines. You pay a fortune for a jar of tasteless powder that's supposed to suppress your appetite and make you suffer for the sake of beauty. A medieval peasant ate pure wood fiber not to fit into new pants, but to survive until summer. Modern dietetics is in many ways a simulation of that very extreme historical famine, only for your own hard-earned money. To sum up this harsh method, we can say that cow bread was the most honest symbol of medieval survival. It wasn't tasty, it wasn't healthy in the modern sense of the word, but it reliably fulfilled its main purpose. It kept the flickering flame of life burning in the human body until the first edible grasses emerged from under the snow. So the next time you don't like the taste of slightly burnt toast for breakfast, just remember your ancestors. Remember the people who chewed ground pine and thanked their lucky stars that they had anything to chew on this morning. These days, when we feel a little under the weather in winter, we go to the pharmacy and buy effervescent vitamin tablets. We know all about the benefits of citrus fruits and drink fresh squeezed orange juice to protect our bodies from seasonal viruses. But for a person stuck in a snow-covered medieval village, the word orange was as fantastical as a trip to the moon. In winter, their diet consisted of dried meat, salted fish, and shriveled grains, the perfect diet for slow suicide. The main killer of those times was not the cold or wild wolves, but an invisible vitamin C deficiency that led to the dreaded scurvy. Scurvy is a disease that literally causes your body to fall apart while you're still alive. First, your gums start to bleed. Then your healthy teeth loosen and fall out, and old wounds suddenly reopen. Ships setting out on long voyages regularly lost up to half of their strong crew precisely because of this terrible, rotting disease. But the forest dwellers of the north found salvation growing right above their heads. Always green even in the bitterest frosts. They began brewing a thick tea from ordinary pine needles, which saved them from a painful death with remarkable effectiveness. This coniferous drink was their only shield against an invisible enemy, slowly dissolving their bodies from within. It sounds absolutely wild, but here lies a true biochemical revelation, which scientists were only able to confirm many centuries after this method was discovered. Fresh pine needles contain 5 times more vitamin C than the much-praised lemons or oranges brought from hot countries. Later, in enlightened Europe, this practice was forgotten because drinking fir tree broth came to be seen as a sign of extreme poverty. Aristocrats preferred to die of noble diseases rather than be treated by the methods of simple, dirty peasants from the deep forest. As a result, the British Navy continued to lose thousands of excellent sailors to scurvy well into the 19th century, until it made lemon juice mandatory. If the admirals hadn't been so fixated on their supposed civility, they could have solved the problem of scurvy centuries earlier. All it took was throwing a couple of pine branches into a pot of water to save entire fleets from a horrible, rotting death. A mistake in identifying the right tree cost lives, so children learned to distinguish pine needles before they could even speak properly. Today, we can't tell an edible mushroom from a poisonous one, even with a smart app on our expensive smartphone. The taste of proper pine tea is quite pleasant, with strong citrus notes and a light, resinous aftertaste on the lips. It warms a frozen body from the inside, gets the blood flowing, and provides an instant burst of energy for hard physical labor in the cold. Summing up this method, we see how life-saving remedies can be hidden in the most unexpected and familiar things around us. Coniferous tea saved tens of thousands of lives before scientists even knew about the existence of the letters in the vitamin alphabet. Our ancestors didn't have fancy labs or microscopes, but they were brilliant observers and knew how to draw the right empirical conclusions. So if you ever find yourself lost in a winter forest without any food, don't despair or panic prematurely. Just find a pine tree, build a fire, and do what your great-grandfathers did hundreds of years ago. Brew yourself a life-saving tea. In modern medicine, there are things that, at a single glance, make the average person's blood run cold. We're used to the idea that wounds must be clean, treated with alcohol, and covered with snow-white antiseptic bandages to shield them from prying eyes. But if you suffered an open leg fracture or a deep spear wound in the 14th century, you had no access to alcohol or antibiotics. Instead, a medieval surgeon might have used a method that today seems like the perfect plot for a horror movie about rotting flesh. He would deliberately introduce dozens of live green bottlefly larvae into your open, throbbing wound to save your infected leg. Yes, it sounds absolutely nightmarish and incredibly repulsive to anyone with a basic sense of aesthetics and squeamishness. Imagine white worms wriggling inside your body and the doctor telling you that this is the best way to avoid limb amputation. Most modern patients would rather die on the spot or flee the hospital than endure such a revolting procedure. But in a world where any scratch could lead to fatal gangrene in a matter of days, aesthetics took a back seat. People knew that the larvae did a job no medieval surgeon could handle with his crude iron knife. These tiny creatures were, in essence, the world's first microsurgery team, working with incredible biological precision. What then was the genius behind this seemingly repulsive medieval method of treating purulent infections? The larvae, however, literally ate the infection from the inside out, leaving the wound perfectly clean and ready for the natural healing process. They worked around the clock, penetrating the deepest recesses of the wound, where even the sharpest surgical instrument could not reach. With the arrival of the 20th century and the invention of penicillin, this effective method was happily forgotten and strictly banned in hospitals. Doctors breathed a sigh of relief because they no longer had to look at wriggling worms in intensive care units. Antibiotics seemed like a panacea for all ills, a clean and elegant solution that would forever rid humanity of the filth of the past. And do you know what the world's most advanced institutions did when they found themselves at a dead end in the face of these invincible modern infections? They quietly returned to that very same banned medieval method, beginning to mass-produce sterile larvae to treat critically ill patients. Summing up this nauseating method, we must acknowledge the incredible wisdom of the brutal historical medicine of past centuries. Medieval people were not burdened by our modern prejudices about the aesthetics of treatment and the absolute sterility of hospital wards. They looked only at the result. If maggots save a leg from the surgeon's saw, then maggots are man's best friends. This method is the best proof that sometimes the most repulsive things in nature are created for our salvation. And even if the mere thought of it makes you cringe, just know that this forbidden trick works flawlessly even today. In our modern world, salt is just a cheap flavor enhancer that costs pennies at any 24-hour store. Doctors constantly scare us by saying that excessive salt consumption leads to heart attacks, hypertension, and other horrors of modern city life. But if you told a medieval peasant that salt was evil, he would have looked at you as if you were crazy. In those distant and harsh times, Salt was the equivalent of pure gold, a strategic resource over which bloody, protracted wars were waged. Without salt, a nation's survival during the winter was physically impossible, as it was the only way to preserve the meat they had hunted. The process of salting meat was not just a culinary recipe, it was a matter of biological survival for an entire large family. If a peasant slaughtered a pig in the fall, he had to ensure that the meat did not rot before the next warm summer. A modern person would simply put the butchered carcass in the freezer and forget about it for a few months. In the Middle Ages, there were no freezers, so people used extreme salting with whole salt crystals to turn the meat into a hard, inedible rock. The meat was literally buried in huge oak barrels under a thick layer of coarse, whole salt, which drew all the moisture out of it. An important point, they always used whole chunks. No one wasted precious time grinding it. Why was deep preservation with whole salt crystals so vitally necessary and absolutely indispensable for survival? The answer lies in simple physics. Coarse salt dissolves more slowly and creates a constant, uniform osmotic barrier against putrefactive bacteria. Bacteria attempting to penetrate a piece of meat instantly lost their own water and died from dehydration on the surface. Using large, unground pieces ensured that brine would form gradually over many long months of storage. Fine dust would have been quickly washed away by the first juices, leaving the meat defenseless against the inevitable putrefactive attack of microbes. But this ideal ancient method of food preservation had one enormous, simply unbelievable negative side effect. The salted meat became so hard and over-salted that it was physically impossible to chew and swallow without lengthy preparation. The meat turned into a piece of salty wood that could break the teeth of even the strongest and most robust young warrior. To eat their precious winter supply, people had to soak this rock in fresh water for several days in a row. They constantly changed the water, trying to wash away from the fibers the very mineral that had just saved the meat from rotting. This process seems absurd from the perspective of modern cooking shows featuring quick dinners for busy people. Sailors on long voyages often lacked fresh water for soaking and were forced to gnaw on this salty wood dry. This led to severe dehydration and kidney disease, but saved them from instant death due to the complete lack of food on the ship. Ironically, today authorities strictly regulate and often ban the sale of traditionally salted meat due to new sanitary standards. Government inspectors require the use of sodium nitrite and other complex chemical additives to create the attractive pink color of sausage found in supermarkets. Traditional gray medieval salted meat doesn't look as appealing on the shelf, so it has fallen victim to aggressive modern marketing and government standards. We've been forced to trade an ancient natural preservative for chemical dyes, so our food looks prettier on social media before dinner. Sometimes our obsession with a pretty picture makes us forget the true essence of things and the body's basic survival needs. To sum up this last method, we can say that salt was the very foundation of survival for all of European civilization. These weren't just crystals to enhance flavor, they were tiny, natural shields protecting people from invisible armies of decay. Without this simple method, our ancestors would not have been able to survive a single harsh winter, let alone undertake long journeys. So the next time you salt your dinner, remember that you are holding in your hands an ancient guarantor of human life. This white powder has built more great empires and saved more lives than any sophisticated weapon invented by man. When we look back at these 10 strange, forbidden, and forgotten ways of survival, we begin to see history in a completely different light. The Middle Ages no longer seem to us like an era of foolish savages who treated themselves with mud solely because of their hopeless illiteracy and stupidity. On the contrary, it was an era of brilliant practitioners who turned the harshest nature into their personal pharmacy and a reliable fortress. They used dead animals for warmth, spider webs to stop bleeding, and swamps to store their precious food supplies. Modern, arrogant science spent centuries banning these methods, and now spends billions to prove their absolute effectiveness once again. Our modern, comfortable world has made us incredibly soft, dependent on complex supply chains and wall outlets. If the power went out tomorrow and the supermarkets closed, the vast majority of us wouldn't last a week in the concrete jungle. We have forgotten how to listen to nature, how to use its hidden mechanisms to protect our own fragile human lives. Studying these historical life hacks isn't just a fun excursion into a strange past for the sake of weekend entertainment. It's a reminder of just how incredibly resilient, resourceful, and strong a person can be when their back is pressed against a cold wall.